The clearing seemed like a stage set by the forest itself, for a drama no one would feel prepared to witness. From above, the helicopter spotlights drew flickering circles over the treetops, sweeping long shadows that, for moments, seemed to come to life. In the center, a massive dark-furred body heaved in restrained spasms. The bear, known to the rangers as tame and predictable, lay hunched under her own weight, her front paws pinned by stiff, curved and shiny wires, like ancient needles from a nightmare. The ground, churned up by concentric furrows, betrayed that the struggle had been silent and fierce. Around them, the rescue team moved with tense precision, each gesture calculated not to exacerbate what was already extreme. The title of this story came to fruition before the cameras and astonished eyes. Heroic Rescue Team saves docile bear trapped in giant centipede stingers. The air was saturated with a metallic odor, a mixture of blood, damp savanna, and a bittersweet toxin that irritated the throat. Masks covered faces, not only out of protocol, but also out of fear of the invisible. There were ropes anchored to tree trunks, improvised splints, boxes of veterinary antidotes, heating blankets and syringes lined up like instruments in an urgent concert. The voices, kept at a low pitch so as not to disturb the bear's instincts, came in short bursts of technical commands, though nothing there sounded truly controllable. With each breath the bear took, light reflected off silvery dots embedded in her skin, and her muscle fibers trembled as if still trying to expel the foreign body that had overcome them. Around the clearing, a human fringe formed, a mix of onlookers and residents alerted by the roar of the rotors. On some faces were unshed tears, the raw astonishment of those who see the line between everyday life and legend dissolve without warning. Children were pulled back by the arms, but their huge eyes remained fixed on the fallen animal, a thread of empathy that needed no explanation. Park rangers set up a cordon with yellow tape, and the lined vehicles projected headlights that came and went like a tide of light, adding an urban layer to a wild landscape. Cameras trembled in anxious hands, and the succession of flashes captured the bear from angles that sometimes magnified her as a monument, sometimes diminished her to the fragility of a wounded body. At the edge of the illuminated circle, the ground betrayed the other protagonist, the one who preferred the subterranean, parallel grooves, fine impressions like the tracks of a living machine, segmented scales that glinted when a beam of light hit the right crevices. It wasn't legend that was on display there. It was matter, mass, chemistry, ancient instinct. In newly opened crevices, the curved stingers resembled fishhooks embedded in the skin of the world. As the team brought the cutters closer, a slight vibration ran through the earth, and the birds, which until then had been observing from above, aborted their routes in an alarmed choreography. There was, therefore, urgency not only for the bear's life, but for the threat moving out of frame. The operation on the surface seemed like a textbook protocol: stabilize, neutralize toxins, release, evacuate. Subtly, however, it felt like a duel between distinct eras. On one side, human compassion supported by science, technology, and coordinated bravery. On the other, a creature whose presence rewrote the invisible map of the forest, reminding us that the underground holds secrets that urban haste has forgotten to notice. Every second was a window opening and closing on the same question: how far can courage endure the unknown before giving in to fear? The bear, its snout resting on brittle leaves, breathed in short bursts, and the hot vapor marked the cold air in intermittent patterns. Dilated pupils didn't seek faces. They lingered on a nameless point, as if pain had anchored it to a place no human could follow. The once shiny fur was darkened by a mixture of soil, sap, and blood, and at the edges of the punctures, hardened halos appeared, evidence of a venom that coagulated more than it wounded. Under the portable lamps, the skin looked like a map of red islands. On each island, a curved stinger vibrated almost imperceptibly, as if breathing on its own. The rescuers, spread out in a semicircle, adjusted angles, tested distances and checked pressures. There was a clear plan, and at the same time a sense that the plan wouldn't be enough. The first successful cut came with the precision of surgery amid chaos. Clamps, pressure, extraction, compress, topical antidote, heart rate monitoring. The bear reacted with an involuntary movement that raised dust, and for a moment everything stopped, as when a high note suspends the orchestra. The second stinger required a different approach. Its base plunged deeper, touching a bundle of nerves pulsing beneath the skin. There was a silent shift of positions, and the metal found the exact spot to cut without severing what could not be severed. Meanwhile, the edge of the clearing transformed into an amphitheater. The murmur grew and faded with each advance. At some point, the wind gusted, bringing a stronger mineral smell, as if the earth itself had been sanded. The vibration returned, this time more steadfast, ripping a simultaneous rustle from the trees. In response, the hands quickened, the flashlights moved closer, and the arc of human bodies over the animal thickened into a single form of protection. The scene was at once exposition and promise. There, the mask of the unknown began to crack. The sequence of extractions continued with an almost ritualistic rhythm, and each stinger deposited in the stainless steel tray yielded a record, a number, a file, as if the documentation could contain the astonishment. Trained eyes searched for vital signs that returned, still timidly, to their original position. Breathing ceased to be merely survival and became a means of return. With its front paws partially free, the bear's weight redistributed itself, and a low, cracking sound echoed along the slope, reminding us that the entire forest, in its materials and movements, was following the tide of events. At the climax of the procedure, when the last visible stinger gleamed in a direct beam, the narrative that had been told in images gained the clarity of a sentence that fused fact and destiny. A heroic rescue team saves a docile bear trapped in the stingers of a giant centipede. It wasn't just a statement. It was the seal of an inevitable that the rest of the story would need to explain. The bear, covered in blankets, received the final dose of the neutralizer. Belts and splints were adjusted. The ropes tightened. The helicopter lowered, and the air swirled with enough force to bend grass and emotions. As the heavy body began to lift off the ground, time seemed to expand, and every gaze fixed on the same suspended point. The clearing finally breathed with it, feeling the weight lift for a moment. Nothing, however, was finished. The ground still held fresh cracks, and the vibration, even distant, reminded us of buried questions begging for answers. The climax, fulfilled in its promise of visual, emotional, and social shock, now raised the ladder back in time. To understand how a rescue mission had become a confrontation with something sleeping beneath the earth, it was necessary to go back. From above, the bear floated toward the light, and the forest instinctively closed the circle. The rest of the story would race to reach this moment. The forest dawned with an almost rehearsed serenity, as if the entire valley had coordinated rhythms to postpone any memory of sirens and searchlights. The sparse mist floated close to the river, dissolving into wisps as it touched the surface, and the sound of the water formed a routine trail that restored things to their proper place. Before the chaos, there was this scene, trails marked by hooves and paws, branches bending under the weight of small monkeys, birds keeping watch from the summits, leaves freshly nibbled by nocturnal herbivores. In that earlier time, the surveillance cameras recorded without urgency, accumulating records of the life of Mira, the docile bear who visited the banks to fish and rub her back against favorite trunks. The forest rangers, divided into shifts, recognized patches of fur and footprint patterns like reading a familiar letter. Nothing seemed out of place. On calm days, the rescue team maintained equipment, tested antidotes, and calibrated sensors. The leader, accustomed to mapping real risks and imaginary noises, assigned tasks with the confidence of someone who had lived through fire and flood seasons. The youngest member of the team, still impressionable, dedicated himself to Mira's trails, collecting data on schedules, routes and habits to predict interactions with residents on the park's edges. There was also the field biologist, attentive to the balance of microzones, the guardian of the fine adjustments that keep the system breathing. Around them, a wider human circle supported preservation. Riverside dwellers, seed collectors, small farmers, and curious onlookers who exchanged news of sightings like someone discussing the weather. The first signs came small, like noises the brain labels as chance. A fallen log where there was no wind. 3 dead birds lined up on the riverbank, with no signs of predation. A metallic smell permeated the morning, mistaken for old rust from rural bridges. The biologist noted discrete variations in soil acidity at seemingly random points, and the water meter recorded micro-oscillations without corresponding rainfall. These isolated anomalies fit the valley's tolerance patterns. Nothing called for haste. Almost everything called for patience. When the external camera, mounted on a tree at a good angle to capture Mira, captured a tremor in the background, no one noticed immediately. The footage, reviewed days later, would reveal a ripple in the leaves that didn't follow the direction of the wind, but rather a progression from bottom to top, as if roots were breathing. Still in that before, daily life prevailed. Schedules were maintained, rounds completed, reports filled with familiar words. The valley seemed to promise continuity, and the promise sweet convinced almost everyone. A circle of suspicion, however, was beginning to form. Small rodents disappeared from areas where they were abundant. Insects changed routes, avoiding warm soil spots without direct sunlight. A light frost one morning created a spiral pattern in a clearing that melted faster than its surroundings. In field notes, the biologist noted the hypothesis of unusual subterranean activity, perhaps a growing colony of invertebrates or a change in shallow water tables. The leader classified the item as an observation, not a warning. Life teaches that many fears fade when the sun sets, and it was broad daylight. It was in this scenario that Mira altered her routine. The younger man noticed the change when he reviewed the trails. The paw prints veered away from shallow passages and followed a straight line that ignored natural curves, as if guided by an inaudible call. The bear avoided the tree trunk, where she usually rubbed her back, and had abandoned for a full shift her favorite fishing spot. In their place, scratches appeared in the ground, shallow and multiple, with no root-seeking pattern or signs of a dispute. A large body, docile by nature, had become vigilant, and the vigilance of a herbivore weighs on the forest scales like a bell before a storm. Even so, human resistance prevailed at the most subtle level. In a central hub where numbers must be balanced against scarce resources, interpretation tends toward parsimony. Route changes by a single individual didn't justify relocating teams unless they threatened people. The institutional interpretation preferred the shortest route, irregular dry season, slightly scarcer food, atypical movements. The underground noise continued to be classified as coincidence. Meanwhile, on the inhabited edge, residents shared fragmented comments. A dog that retreated from a trail it always used to advance on. A pole that vibrated without a truck nearby. A vegetable garden with small cracks that appeared on a mild morning. The mosaic of impressions seen from above formed a pattern, but on the ground, where each life demands its own explanation, the pieces took a long time to come together. The following week, the team recorded the first unequivocal physical indicator, a fresh hole wide enough to swallow a knee, with burned edges and an oily sheen on a film of water. The biologist expanded the sample collection, and the young man marked the perimeter with discreet tape to keep curious people away. The odor emerging from the hole was reminiscent of heated iron and freshly turned earth. The surrounding surface responded with a slight vibration, almost a pulsation, perceptible only when the silence stretched. It was a call for caution. Still, protocol kept the scale low, requiring only close observation. Mira reappeared in the twilight, far from the main cameras, and the thermal sensor bathed her golden fur in false hues. The recording showed a normal breathing rate, but a muscular tension that didn't match the security of familiar terrain. She sniffed the void and for a moment kept her weight evenly distributed, as if deciding whether to advance or retreat. Around her, small shapes slithered under leaves, changing the pattern of the ground, as if tracing invisible corridors. The young man, reviewing the file, sensed a strangeness that logic couldn't yet name. The awakening, as almost always, didn't come with fanfare. It was a sequence of small decisions that shifted the axis, maintaining nighttime surveillance at one point, activating a vibration data logger that was usually turned off, requesting a toxicological analysis from the lab that fit under the routine rubric, expanding the patrol radius during the coldest early mornings when the ground speaks loudest. The sum of these gestures inaugurated the crossing. The false peace, built by habits that protect the mind from excess, began to give way to disciplined curiosity. On the morning before the disaster, the valley still seemed to promise continuity. The sun rose unhurriedly, birds filled the air as if the song were a signal that all was under control, and the river water insisted on flowing as always. Mira's camera, however, captured a detail that had escaped her in the previous weeks, an elongated, segmented shadow crossing the bank in a movement that belonged neither to snakes nor mammals. The file, simple in pixels, carried the seed of what would break the mask of everyday life. The awakening took hold there, the moment nature wrote a clear yet delicate warning. And it was from this warning that the team, still unaware of the extent of what they would face, began walking toward the heart of the valley, the same heart that hours later would be illuminated by propellers, sirens, and steady hands on a wounded body. When the first video was reviewed, the ambient sound betrayed more than the image itself. Beneath the constant roar of the wind, there was a secondary sound, a low, rhythmic dragging that seemed to come from underground. The surveillance camera, mounted on an ancient tree, had captured Mira the bear standing still, her nose to the ground, sniffing something invisible. In the following seconds, a long, thin shadow crossed the frame, segmented and fluid, like a body gliding beneath the surface. The image wasn't sharp enough to convince any skeptical observer, but it was enough to spark a flare of unease in the technicians who reviewed it. The biologist tried to alert her superiors, but the report was met with bureaucratic formality. They classified the recording as focus interference or a thermal sensor defect. Nature, they said, is full of optical illusions, and the human mind tends to see monsters where there is only movement. The team, reduced by budget cuts, followed standard protocols. No resources would be released without concrete physical evidence. It was the young assistant who decided on his own to return to the suspected area. He carried a portable camera and a makeshift sampling kit. The valley looked the same as every other day. The river flowed calmly, and the air had that earthy scent that precedes rain. But there was something different about the ground. Small, circular cracks, perfectly sized, connected by trails of disturbed soil. He bent down, touched the edge of a crack, and felt a vibration, a living, almost organic pulse. When he collected the sample, he realized that the soil was permeated with a viscous, oil-like, and slightly corrosive substance. That night, he sent the material to the lab and awaited the results. The report arrived 2 days later with a curious observation. The sample contained traces of an unknown protein, similar in structure to chitin, the same compound that forms the exoskeleton of insects and arachnids. The report came with a skeptical note, likely environmental contamination. No large organism could contain such a concentration without biological collapse. Still, the young man knew what he had felt under his gloves. It was breathing. Meanwhile, Mira disappeared. The cameras didn't capture her presence for 48 hours. The silence in the automatic recordings felt like a physical and spiritual absence. The birds in the region changed their paths, avoiding the central stretch of the valley. The vibration sensor installed by the biologist began recording periodic waves, always at the same interval, as if a creature were traveling through underground galleries in a continuous cycle. On the third day, a new recording emerged. Mira appeared staggering, her fur wet and stained with dark slime. She walked slowly, looking back with each step, as if fearing something she hadn't yet learned to name. The team gathered to analyze the footage, but the leader, pressured by superiors, maintained a cautious stance. According to him, nothing indicated a real threat. Animals get injured and recover on their own all the time. It was best to avoid alarmism. Denial, disguised as prudence, prevailed over instinct. That same night, a storm hit the valley. Heavy rain drowned out sounds and washed away trails. In the makeshift shelter, the young man couldn't sleep. Mira's video played on his computer screen, looping. Something about the way the bear's body moved, stiff and trembling, indicated pain. When lightning illuminated the window, he decided to act. He went out with a flashlight, raincoat and GPS, determined to follow the same path the camera had shown. Reaching the landmark, he found the ground dark and damp. Fresh tracks led down a slope to a semicircular opening in the ground, wide enough for a full-grown animal to pass through. The air coming from it was hot and heavy, as if exhaling from the mouth of a furnace. The young man shone his light inside and saw something glistening. A stinger, long, curved, gleaming like polished metal, stuck in a root. It wasn't rock or thorn. It was alive, pulsing, and a yellowish liquid dripped from its tip. He instinctively recoiled, but the ground vibrated beneath his feet. The earth seemed to breathe, and tiny particles of dust spiraled upward as if the forest had coughed. The vibration grew, slow and steady, until the ground cracked a few meters away. A deep, muffled sound echoed, and something moved beneath the surface. The flashlight fell extinguished. In the darkness, the young man felt the air shift, sucked into the opening, as if the entire valley were inhaling. She ran back, stumbling in the mud, and reached the shelter with her body covered in scratches. No one believed her description. They spoke of exhaustion, of an illusion caused by the storm, of reflections from the lightning. The biologist, though shaken, didn't comment. There were protocols to follow, and every word could be used to discredit them. The leader, under pressure, only recorded a geological anomaly. In the following days, the isolation deepened. The young man began to be seen as an alarmist. The report he had prepared disappeared from the digital archives, replaced by a generic note about mild seismic activity. But the silence of the sensors spoke another language. The ground registered regular spikes, and the low-frequency rumble remained constant. Denial didn't erase the danger. It merely made it invisible. The following morning, Mira emitted a roar that reverberated for miles. Surveillance cameras captured the sound before the system crashed. When the team arrived at the scene, they found the terrain devastated, trees uprooted, and a fresh crater in the center. At the rim, tufts of the bear's fur mingled with fragments of something hard, segmented, similar to chitin plates. The leader ordered it recorded as natural land collapse after heavy rain. The young man, exhausted, stared at the hole that swallowed the horizon. He knew Mira was still alive, somewhere beneath the ground, but science there had chosen to close its eyes. Evidence was not enough when the unknown threatened the order of the possible. The forest, however, did not recognize human protocols. Subterranean life expanded, and as the valley regained its semblance of normalcy, something beneath the earth breathed, ever stronger. The silence that followed Mira's disappearance seemed denser than the valley floor itself. The mornings lost their usual chorus of birdsong, and even the river, which had once murmured steadily, now flowed in a muffled tone, as if afraid to awaken what slumbered in the depths. The rescue team tried to follow protocol, but an invisible tension seeped through the spreadsheet's reports and averted glances. Something was amiss, and everyone sensed it, but no one dared to name it. It was the young man, the same one who had descended into the crevice, who broke the rhythm of denial. He returned to the site, now accompanied by the biologist, carrying thermal sensors and infrared cameras. The equipment captured an irregular pattern beneath the ground, a mass in constant motion, slowly moving through the valley's subsoil. The measurements showed an anomalous temperature, intense heat coursing through tunnels several meters deep. The image resembled a fiery serpent underground. The biologist found no plausible geological explanation. That same night, the readings intensified. The monitoring system was overwhelmed by interference, and the sensors registered energy spikes incompatible with any known natural phenomenon. The vibrations turned into small tremors that shook the camp's wooden structures. The teams on duty rushed outside, and for a few seconds, the ground vibrated like a living breath. When it subsided, silence returned, but fear was now a tangible substance. The news spread among the surrounding residents. They spoke of subterranean creatures, of shadows that moved at night. The forest had become the scene of ancient murmurs and prayers. And it was in this context that the young man received an anonymous email containing a series of internal reports dating back years. They contained confidential records of a biological expedition conducted by a private company studying mutations in subterranean invertebrates. The name of the location was the same valley. The most alarming observation was the last: out-of-control activity, evacuation recommended. No subsequent report was published. The biologist, cross-referencing the data, realized that the former expedition's coordinator was the same person now remotely overseeing the region's environmental operations. The connection between the present and the past became clear. Someone knew of the creature's existence. The truth was being suppressed. While the young man gathered evidence, Mira was located, alive, but in desperate condition. A thermal imaging drone captured her body, partially immobilized by structures resembling giant stingers, stuck in the ground. The images were disturbing. The bear tried to move, but the flexible, pulsating spines held her like living hooks. The entire valley seemed to vibrate around her. The centipede was no longer a hypothesis. It was an absolute presence. Faced with this, the team split. The leader, caught between duty and fear, wanted to deploy only minimal force to avoid causing panic. The biologist, driven by guilt, advocated a full rescue operation. But before any plans could be solidified, the environmental supervisor's representative arrived on site. It was the renowned biologist, the one who, until then, had only appeared in reports and video conferences. He ordered the immediate termination of field investigations, citing uncontrollable biological risk and possible contamination by subterranean fungi. The contradiction was obvious. If the risk was so high, why hide it? Why prevent the bear's rescue? The young man confronted the facts, and the answer came silently. The man's gaze was enough for the truth to be revealed without words. He had known about the creature for years and had tried to contain it in secret. The centipede, the result of natural mutations accelerated by industrial chemicals dumped on the riverbanks, had evolved in isolation. It had become a subterranean predator, adapted to heat and darkness. The plan was simple and cowardly: cover up, contain, and forget. But Mira, digging for roots, had broken the layer of soil sealing the nest. The creature had reacted instinctively, attacking in defense. Now they were both trapped in the same cycle of pain, the innocent animal and the monster that human instinct had helped create. The rescue team, torn between obedience and conscience, decided to act on their own. Equipped with tranquilizers, cables, and portable lights, they walked into the heart of the valley. Each step seemed to resonate against an invisible drum. Vibrations came from all directions, and the ground began to crack in small lines. The air grew heavy, permeated with an acidic odor. When they reached the clearing, they saw Mira, exhausted, covered in blood and sap, surrounded by living structures that moved like roots, but glowed like liquid metal. It was the biologist who recognized the pattern. The roots were the centipede's legs, and the stingers piercing the ground were restraining appendages. used to immobilize prey while the toxin was slowly injected. There was method to the horror. The rescuers split up. Some kept their distance, manning their equipment. Others advanced with almost irrational courage. The young man took the lead, carrying the main tranquilizer. The biologist led the instructions. When the first jet hit one of the stingers, the creature reacted suddenly. The entire ground shook, and a sharp noise like the scream of metal rubbing together echoed through the valley. The trees tilted, the birds fled en masse, and a crevice opened, momentarily exposing the monster's dark, segmented carapace. The flashlight beam reflected off the surface, revealing the impossible. A colossal centipede, its body elongated and pulsating, each segment moving in rhythm with the soil's breathing. Terror paralyzed part of the team. Still, the young man maintained his steady aim and applied the second blast. The stinger that held Mira retracted a few centimeters. At that moment, the supervising biologist, desperate to maintain secrecy, tried to halt the operation. He ordered an immediate retreat, threatening to denounce everyone. But the leader, tired of the inaction, responded with action. The entire team joined forces. That was when the turnaround was complete. The man trying to cover everything up retreated, stumbled, and fell near the edge of the crevice. A metallic flash cut through the air, and a stinger emerged, quick as an arrow snaring his leg. The scream echoed before the ground swallowed him. The impact shook the team, but confirmed what everyone feared. The centipede was responding to human vibrations, sensing sound, heat, and fear. There was no more room for theories. It was either survive or disappear with the valley. The rescue turned into a battle. Cables strained, machines roared, and screams mingled with the sound of the living forest. When Mira was finally partially freed, the ground exploded in a jet of dirt and dust. For an eternal second, everyone saw the creature complete. A body stretching until it was lost in the shadows, multiple eyes reflecting the light in impossible colors, and stingers dripping venom. Fear reached its final form. And then, amidst the chaos, the bear, with the strength of someone fighting not only for their own life, but for the natural order that created them, rose. With a desperate movement, they broke the last stinger that held them, while the team, deafened by the subterranean din, retreated. It was the first crack in the mask of the unknown. The truth had emerged. The centipede recoiled, wounded and enraged, diving back into the bowels of the earth. The forest trembled, the valley breathed, and the team, covered in dust and disbelief, realized they had crossed the line between science and myth. Now there was no turning back. All that remained was to face the final phase, the ultimate confrontation between human courage and what man himself had helped awaken. Dawn arrived without birds. The forest, once alive and noisy, seemed suspended in an ancient silence, the kind of stillness that precedes the inevitable. The centipede had retreated during the night, but the ground continued to vibrate, as if the monster were breathing beneath the earth, reorganizing its forces. The exhausted team gathered before the devastated clearing. In the center, Mira lay, wrapped in thermal blankets, her body trembling and covered in wounds. Her open eyes reflected the grey sky, and at the same time, the fear of what still moved below. The operations leader, his face streaked with mud, his uniform torn, and his gaze hardened by the night, understood there was no longer any way to wait for reinforcements. The government had been notified, but the response was slow, fraught with bureaucracy and disbelief. If they didn't act, the creature would return, and the bear wouldn't survive another attack. There was only one choice left: face the abyss. The improvised plan was born of desperation and ingenuity. They would use the chemical containment equipment to create a trap. Thermal lures, simulating body heat, placed around the clearing, connected to electrical cables that would release a controlled discharge. The goal was to force the creature to emerge and neutralize it with a combination of sedatives and restraint chains. It was an insane risk, but it was the only one. As the group prepared the ground, helicopters approached, bringing journalists, curious onlookers, and authorities. News of the bear saved by heroes had spread, but no one imagined that the true horror still lurked beneath the ground beneath their feet. When the first helicopter landed, the wind from the blades kicked up dust and leaves, and the noise, the loud, rhythmic sound, was the trigger. The ground reacted. Suddenly, a deep rumble reverberated through the valley. The trees swayed as if struck by invisible waves. The ground gave way, cracking in concentric circles, and the centipede emerged in a single, colossal, impossible movement. Its segmented body reflected the light in shades of bronze and black, and its stingers, long as spears, dug in and out of the ground in an almost mechanical rhythm. The air filled with a low hum, a frequency that made bones vibrate. The crowd panicked. People ran in opposite directions. Helicopters scrambled to gain altitude, and rescuers took up their positions. The leader waved to the young operator, who activated the bait circuit. Red lights began flashing around the clearing. The artificial heat attracted the creature, which writhed violently, displacing tons of earth with each movement. The trap had worked. In the center, Mira struggled to her feet, instinctively protecting the cub the vets had discovered beside her during the early hours, a small bear barely able to stand. It was for him she still fought. The image, captured on camera, would spread hours later as a symbol of resistance, but in that moment it only served to fuel the urgency. The team knew, if they failed, the entire valley would be swallowed up. The young man ran to the main valve, connecting the last cable of the containment system. The centipede advanced, guided by the heat, its multiple eyes reflecting human movement. The instant it raised its body, exposing its vulnerable underside, the leader shouted the final command. The electric bolt pierced the ground, followed by a burst of light and a deafening roar. The discharge rippled through the creature's body, and the air smelled of ozone and burning flesh. The centipede writhed violently, striking trees and machinery. Stingers dug into the air and ground, destroying equipment and raising dust. The young man was thrown backward by a side impact, and the biologist rushed to drag him away, shouting instructions that were lost in the noise. For endless seconds, the valley became a field of energy and destruction, the final clash between what man had created and what natural instinct still protected. When the dust settled, the centipede's body remained motionless, half exposed, half still embedded underground. Emergency lights flickered over its dark carapace, which was beginning to lose its metallic sheen. Mira, wounded and exhausted, watched from afar, her young huddled beside her. The stunned team kept their distance, waiting for vital signs. Then a slight tremor ran through the ground, and the monster, in a final spasm, dove back into the earth, opening a crevice that swallowed its own body. The final sound was like a deep sigh, and the valley fell silent. The confrontation was over, but the catharsis came with loss. 3 team members were injured. One of them would not survive the following hours. The accomplice biologist remained missing, swallowed by the creature he had tried to hide. The victory had the bittersweet taste of all conquests over the unknown. Saving one's life had cost others. In the following days, Mira was transported to a veterinary center. The cub, who miraculously survived, became a symbol of hope and rebirth. The team, though acclaimed by the press, knew the true story would never be told in full. The government classified the records as confidential, and the official report described the event as a geological anomaly with interference from local fauna. Even so, the forest held memories that couldn't be recorded. The holes formed by the centipede's claws were covered by vegetation, but at night, those who walked along the riverbank swore they heard faint vibrations beneath their feet, the distant echo of something that never completely dies. Weeks later, the leader returned to the valley. He walked to the now green and silent clearing, and there he found Mira, thinner but still standing, her cub playing among the roots. She watched him for a moment, then turned back to the water, as if knowing the story had come full circle. The man stood still, contemplating the scene, and realized that the line between courage and despair is as thin as the skin that separates the ground from the abyss. The helicopter camera captured the scene from afar, The bear and cub in the morning light, the valley at rest, and the human silhouette watching. The final narration summed up the meaning of it all, not in words of triumph, but of awareness. Truth always finds a way to emerge, even from beneath the deepest earth. And when that happens, man is left with a choice, to hide or to face what he himself helped to awaken. The video ends with a simple question. And you? Would you have the courage to go down to the valley? The fade-out brings the soft sound of the river and the name of the story. Heroic rescue team saves gentle bear trapped in giant centipede stingers.